welcome to another edition of Did You Know Doctor Who? What you may not know about Doctor Who. This time we're going to look at the Daleks. I hope you enjoy. Sidney Newman hated the idea of boggle-eyed monsters and robots, and applied a ban to this for Doctor Who serials. He was hesitant when reading about the plans for the Daleks. As many of you already know, the Daleks are based on the Nazis, primarily their obsession with racial purity and the extermination of the inferior. The Daleks were designed by Raymond Cusick, and underwent several iterations. One iteration was a cylindrical design. The Daleks' voices were achieved using a ring modulator. This serial is the serial that saved Doctor Who from early cancellation, as it achieved a massive boost in viewership by over 50%. This serial was filmed at the last minute, as there was no other script available at the time, and the production was in crisis mode as a result of the poor reception of An Unearthly Child. It replaced stories such as The Hidden Planet and The Masters of Luxor. Initially, this was to be set in a far future rather than Skaro. In 1965, The Daleks was adapted into the coloured film featuring Peter Cushing as the human Doctor Who. Working titles for this story were The Mutants and Beyond the Sun. The Magnodon becomes the first alien being, other than the Doctor and Susan, to appear in the series. The original proposal, the survivors, had the Daleks wanting to wipe out the Fowls to ensure that they could never start another neutronic war, unaware the Fowls were now pacifists. In the 7th episode, the Fowls would bring the defeated Daleks back online to discuss peace terms. By the end, the Doctor would reveal that neither side started the war, that they had been attacked by an alien race. The descendants of those aliens would then arrive on Skaro as the radiation levels had lowered, to make reparations and assist in the rebuilding of the planet. Due to insufficient time and budget, this plot was cut out and the Daleks were redrafted as more obvious villains with no happy ending. Elements of this plot were reused for the Doctor Who Unbound story, Masters of War. The first Dalek seen on screen advancing towards Barbara at the end of the Dead Planet was played by floor manager Michael Ferguson. The Daleks were originally powered by regular electricity. Mervyn Pinfield suggested that they could run instead on static electricity. The story features the rare time a character is shot by a Dalek but not killed. It was Richard Martin who suggested that the foul anti-radiation drug be lethal to the Daleks. The original proposals were that the germs from the TARDIS crew were killing them or the radiation was dropping. Bands of sticky tape were affixed around the shoulder section of the Daleks after William Hartnell cut himself on one of the metal bands. All episodes exist in the 16mm telerecordings. The episodes were all recovered from negative prints which were discovered at BBC Enterprises in 1978. The negative of the rescue is a dub from the positive print. It was during the filming of this serial that JFK was assassinated. The very next day, Doctor Who made its public debut when the first episode of An Unearthly Child was broadcast. The Rescue is the first episode of Doctor Who in which the dematerialization of the TARDIS is achieved through the in-camera technique of roll back and mix. This effect was extraordinarily difficult in the 1960s, which is why it was only done a few times in the monochromatic era of the programme. The creature housed inside the Dalek casing was conceived as being somewhat like a toad, or frog-like in appearance, with a massive brain. By Raymond Cusick, a small webbed claw is visible in the transmitted story, though the full Dalek creature is kept tastefully hidden. Later stories would retcon the Dalek mutant to instead look like a deformed fleshly octopus, with a number of uneven tentacles instead of fully developed limbs. In the original script, the dangers facing Ian Barbara and the Fowls in the mountains were different. They were originally going to be mutated spiders and a fiery gas fixture. In the original script, the Doctor and Susan were sentenced to be executed in a sonic chamber. In the original script, much was made of a forthcoming Great Rain, a periodical meteorological event on Skaro, which would reduce the radiation levels enough to permit the Daleks to emerge from their city and confront the Fowls. According to Raymond Cusick's obituary, he originally planned for the Dalek skirts to contain bulbs that would light up. This would require a car battery inside the Dalek. It was rejected because car batteries were too expensive. Carol Ann Ford was surprised by the serial's success, claiming that when the Daleks prodded her, she wanted to laugh. The names of the Fowls were revised in the final script. Formosus was originally called Stahl, London was called Van, and Galantus was called Kirk. Christus was Jal, Antonius was Ven, Andions was Darren, a man originally, and Elron was Zor. Originally 6 Daleks were to be made, but due to budget concerns it was reduced to just 4. To make up for it, there are more mirrors and cardboard cutouts to be used to show that there are more Daleks, so to speak. The final Dalek models stood at 4 foot 8 inches, painted in silver with grey trimmings and light blue balls on the skirts. The lights on the domes were Christmas tree lights covered by a ping pong ball operated by the actor inside. This story was ranked as Doctor Who magazine readers' favourite First Doctor story in their first 3 polls. In 2023, it was demoted to 5th and replaced by the Dalek Invasion of Earth. The reason this serial has 2 directors is because Christopher Barry was busy working on the miniseries Smuggler's Bay. Raymond Kruzik was very disappointed in Dalek City miniature constructed by Shawcraft Models. The firm had followed his rough design drawing too faithfully, and as a result it was very small and lacked detail. He had no choice but to use it. During a delay in filming, Shawcraft were given time to refine it due to talk back from the production assistant's headphones could be heard on the soundtrack. This remount was allowed to the designers to make a better model of the Dalek City. And finally, in 2023, the Daleks was given a coloured version with changes to sound effects and audio to celebrate the 60th anniversary, though it is arguably a much inferior version than the one from before. And that is it for today. The Daleks is the first ever appearance of the Daleks, very obviously so. It's also arguably for a lot of people the first proper story of Doctor Who, because a lot of people don't really like the first story, An Unearthly Child, and for very good reason. It's a very slow pace, very awkward story to begin with. It's, it very much suffers from the first story syndrome, whereas the second story, ups the ante a bit. You go to a different planet, you see aliens, and these aliens are very hostile, and of course, as this is the first time, you don't know what to expect. And that's really what makes the Daleks such a formidable foe. And of course, they are very memorable foes. The look of them, the appearance, everything about them, just, everything is just hitting the right note, so to speak, as I often say a lot of the time. As a story goes, the Daleks is an alright story. Obviously, this is the first time with the Daleks, so, you gotta be a bit lenient towards, how the Daleks, or how these first appearances are. Obviously with something like the 10th planet, they pretty much nailed the Cybermen straight away. With the Daleks, there are a few awkward bits here and there, like for example the whole static electricity thing. I don't think they've ever gone back to that, because it is a very restrictive and very awkward story point to have. Similarly, the appearance of the Daleks are very short and very unusual looking. What I mean is, they look very small. They don't look very threatening compared to, say, the Invasion Daleks, which were much more taller and imposing, and even later versions of the Daleks where they have much better looking, rings and what have you. Just, or the militarized look of the 70s Daleks, their navy sort of blue, sort of dark grey look to them. So from that aspect, they're not as threatening as they will become. Especially when they take prisoners, they shoot people in the leg and just paralyze them for a temporary moment. They're not outright gonna kill you or stalking after you with their, unfazed, unblinking, sort of emotionless eye that they have. It's funny that they, got the eye stalk right, in my opinion, straight away, where there is just that vague sort of straightforward eye, rather than having the stupid pupil. I really hate the pupil look on the Daleks. I know it's the most iconic of the Dalek looks, because it lasted the longest, but it looks too cartoony for me. They nailed it straight away with just the simple light eye. And it is, I think what the story really does well is the background, the history of Skaro, the war between the Thals and what have you. I think it really nails that down perfectly. And of course, the Daleks themselves are, an interesting villain for the Doctor to face. In comparison to, say, something like, some of the previous enemies that the Doctor has faced already, which is just cavemen, or even some that are going to come afterwards, where it's just historical figures rather than, this interesting alien warrior. And of course, it's no wonder that this was the story that made Doctor Who a hit. And so, I think it's just really, really good in that aspect. This is a very important story. Without this story, Doctor Who would not be around. You keep that in mind. This is the story that basically saved the show, because, The first one wasn't very good, and of course, the JFK assassination, all that crap. But then you had this one, and this one just blew it out the park, and of course it got people invested and interested, whereas the first one just didn't do anything for anyone. So it is a very interesting story in that respect. And of course the movie that was released, funnily enough, I watched the movie before watching the actual serial, and so the Peter Cushing movie is quite iconic in a way. All the colourful looking Daleks. The red one was always my favourite. Even to this day, red Dalek's always my favourite type of Dalek. I don't know why, it just is. However, there is another colorization of this, which was released last year as of doing this recording. Of course, it's probably going to be 2025 by the time this gets released. So in 2023, there was a coloured version, and the coloured version is massively inferior in every shape and form. For one thing, it's just way too cut down. The music is abysmal. The sound effects as well are really abysmal. It makes no fucking sense. And the coloration is, it's an interesting aspect, but I'd rather keep things black and white. It is why whenever I see the animated versions of Missing Stories, I always watch in black and white, because I think the colour version is a tainted version of what used to be, personally speaking. That's just my perspective on things, obviously. And, the colorization is an interesting thing, and I do admire it in that respect, but the way they edited it was just absolutely shockingly bad. The music was way too loud in some scenes. Do not watch the colorized version. I'm just saying that right now. Just watch the original. Watch the original. Don't watch the colorized version. But yeah, other than that, I think The Daleks is a great story. It's a very historically important story to Doctor Who, and a very fun story nonetheless. So, I'll see you next time around for another edition of Did You Know Doctor Who? So yeah, bye.